So now that I feel like I'm making progress in my Snowman project, I definitely want to make sure that I save. So I'm going to do a quick file save. And now I want to start thinking about a save as, and I want to increment the file name. And I could do a file save as, and once the dialog box pops up, I can simply change 1 to 2, and I'll hit save. Now, Cinema 4D encourages this kind of workflow where we work on a project for a little while, we save it, and then we save incrementally so that we can move forward and continue to make bold decisions about our design while we build a history into our project. And that can give us a lot of confidence to experiment with what we're working on. We just have to get in the habit of saving that. And in fact, Cinema 4D makes it really easy for us to do that, because not only can we save and save as, but we can also save incremental. If I tap on Save Incremental, you can see that it just updated my current project file with an additional version number. So it versioned it for me. So this is a really great way to work. So what I'll continue to do is, as I work on my Snowman, I'll save, and then I'll do a file Save Incremental so that I can continue to move forward. And if I get in the habit of doing that, I'll end up with a project folder that has a lot of content in it. If I can find my project folder, there it is. It'll have a lot of content in it, but if you look at these individual files are really incredibly small at this point. The renders that we make are going to be very large, but the actual 3D files are extremely small. So I'm going to jump back into Cinema 4D, and I want to start to modify my carrot and apply a slightly more sophisticated texture on it. Now, before I do, I'm going to take the spheres that I have and I'm going to update those with more of a charcoal style texture. So I'll just double click in the material manager. I'll double click on this material and I'll rename this charcoal, and I'll choose a color that's just a really dark gray, and maybe I'll even shift it towards blue just a little bit. So it's kind of a real dark. There we go. There's my charcoal color. And I can start to experiment with some of these other channels. Like I can do things like turn specular off. So when I turn specular on and off, you can see that I get this specular highlight, and maybe I want to keep the specular, but I don't want it so intense. What I can do is select the specular channel, and now I can start to adjust the brightness of the specular. And as I do that, it kind of takes the sharpness of that specular down. I can continue to modify it in other ways, but I can just be aware that I can get in and start modifying these channels. Now currently I only have 2 channels turned on in this texture. I have color, and I have specular. Now, once we start modifying these textures, you need to be careful. I'll just double click and create a new texture, and I'll call this carrot. And because the last thing that I selected, the last channel that I selected in any texture was the specular, I no longer have the color channel selected. And so if I go in here and say, okay, well, I'm trying to make this material a red color, and I say red and I say okay, and well, my red material, it's still showing up kind of this white color, and that's because I just changed the specular to red. I wasn't having the color channel active. So I'll just set this back. I'll just undo to whatever it was before. I'll go back to the color channel, and now I'll click on that color swatch and say okay, and I can set that color to whatever I want. Now my goal here is to create more of a carrot texture, and so I'll go with this, fairly deep orange. That's about the color I want to go with, and I'll say okay. Now I could just go with a real simple flat orange color, and I'll drag that onto my object, and that suggests what I want. But if I want to be a little bit more sophisticated about this, what I can do is I can select my diffusion channel, and I'll turn that on. Now the diffusion channel will affect the way that that light interacts with this object. And there's a really cool feature inside Cinema 4D. If you don't know what something does, you can always right click on it and say show help. And what that will do is that will open up the help document, and it'll explain to you what that channel or that thing or that tool does. So the diffusion channel will allow to make this surface look a little bit more irregular. Now right out of the box, if I just by turning it on, it's not going to do anything. So if I turn it on and I render, you can You can see that, yeah, it looks, it's the color that I want, but it's not making it look as irregular as I had hoped. And so what I'll do is, with the diffusion channel selected, I'll go to where it says texture. There's a little drop down menu here, and if I drop that menu down, what I'll do is I'll choose to add noise. And the moment that I add noise, you can see my preview gets updated, and it's not doing exactly what I want. I'll give it a quick render and see what I got, but it is starting to make it look quite irregular. What I can do is start to modify what noise and how that noise is being applied. And what I can do is, you see here that I got a swatch of the noise that's being used. So remember, I chose texture. Instead of choosing an image or any of these other things, I chose to use noise. Well, a noise was then loaded into this channel, and I could do a couple things. I could just double click on the noise thumbnail, and that will take me into the noise properties. And once I'm in the noise properties, I got a lot of control over this. What I can do is, in the noise field, way over at the end, there's a little drop-down menu, and I can choose different kinds of noise. And maybe I'll just, visually, I'm not sure what a carrot noise would look like, but I kind of like this noise down at the bottom. It's a little bit smoother, and I can select that noise. In addition to that, I can start to modify the color, and rather than having a white black, maybe I'll try to do like a real dark orange, and try to do like a light orange, and see if that is going to give me some different results. And so I'll wait for that preview to update, and it actually, I didn't end up with the effect that I had hoped, but that's okay. I'll continue to play around with this. I could take up or down the global scale, and so I see that being updated now. And what I can do is, maybe I'll make this like 300%. So I'm bumping up the global scale, and I'll just look to this preview to see what it's going to do, and here in a moment it should give me an update on my carrot. If I want to go back to the diffusion channel, I can just click on the diffusion channel, and that'll give me control over things like the brightness. And if I take the brightness down, I'll see what kind of update I get. And if I don't get any update, I'll just bump that back up, and maybe I can play with the mix strength. Take the mix strength down. When I take the mix strength down, you can see that I'm gaining control over how much noise is showing up. And so I'll just play around with these values, and I'm trying to get something that looks a little noisy, and I really won't see the results until I give this a render. So that's one thing that I can do, is start to play around with these different channels. Just don't forget that, by default, you should be looking at the color channel until you start to become more familiar with what's happening in these in the material editor. So I've made my charcoal texture, I've made my carrot texture. I'll just drag my charcoal texture onto these objects now. I'm kind of, getting away with being able to drag and drop these on these objects. But remember, there's also the method of dragging and dropping directly into the object manager. And so if you want to remove a material, you can select the material tab from the object manager and hit delete. And of course, you can always drag materials back to that object as well. So I'm going to continue to play with some of my materials and see what kind of results I can get. Currently, I have just a real simple basic lighting setup inside the scene. The next thing that I want to do is I want to start to model some sticks for the arms. And I'll use kind of a similar technique that I used with the carrot, in that I'll start with a very simple geometric shape. This parametric primitive, I'll make it editable, and I'll start to modify that shape in different ways to create the effect that I'm going for. But we'll do that in the next presentation.